Good evening, Amaqhawe TV viewers. Once again, welcome to our usual slot with Amaqhawe Ethu, where we discuss liberation heritage, where we talk about umzabalazo, how people fought apartheid, how people gathered, mobilized themselves to fight against the brutal system of apartheid. As you always know, on Wednesdays we're together talking to different people from this liberation movement. And today we're having Janet Cherry. Janet Cherry is an activist, Janet Cherry is an academic, Janet Cherry is an author. But today she's here to talk to us about her role, about EUDF, and about what's the current state of EUDF. Please welcome her in your homes. Please listen and hear what she has to bring to you as a activist, as an author, as a lover of freedom. Thank you very much, Professor. Welcome. We welcome you, Amaqhawe Ethu, in our program. And thanks for gracing us with your presence and coming to share with us your experiences in the struggle. We would like to welcome you. But before that, can you give us a brief background who Janet Cherry is? Where did you grow up? How did you become politically involved? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm from Cape Town, born in Cape Town, and I grew up there. And I must say, I'm now a professor of development studies at Nelson Mandela University here in Nelson Mandela Bay. But 40 years ago, I was a young student activist at the University of Cape Town. And when I was at UCT, I became involved with NUSAS, and I became recruited into the ANC at the time as well. So in August 1983, this is the time of the launch of the United Democratic Front, I was the General Secretary of NUSAS, the National Union of South African Students. So at that time, which was a very interesting time in South African history, I was a representative of the student movement, a particular part of the student movement in the apartheid era, which talked about the need for forming a broad front. And that broad front was going to unite people in mass action to take on the apartheid government's proposals for a reform of apartheid system. So that was the background under which I got involved with this.
Wow. Yeah. Thanks, Prof. And what led you to is it because, what caused you to participate in this? There was nothing affecting you ungumlungu, and why did you decide to join and participate in the struggle?
Well, as you say, I did grow up in a privileged background in Cape Town, but when I went to university, I became exposed to many ideas, and I was just somebody who was a lover of justice. And it became apparent to me that it was necessary to get involved, not to stand aside. But I think also at that time I was quite fortunate because it was a moment at which we started to build non-racial organizations, big, inclusive, non-racial organizations, and the space opened up for that. So I was able to get very involved from the beginning of 1980, when there was a campaign to expose the Freedom Charter to the world, which hadn't been done since the 1950s. And we became very involved in that campaign to distribute the Freedom Charter and explain to people what it meant.
Yeah, so you do say that for you it was a love of freedom and justice that caused you to participate in the struggle, and you chose to leave everything of comfort to be associated with all these other leftist or a terrorist whatsoever. You spoke about you being recruited in the ANC. Do you want to share with us how did that happen and who maybe recruited you? It's a free country now, no one is going to be jailed.
Yeah, it's funny though, because we still don't really talk about these things openly. But I was part of a cell in Cape Town, and Gavin Evans, who was the son of the Anglican bishop here, who you might remember, Bishop Bruce Evans, his son recruited me, and he was in turn recruited by Peter Rissos in Harare. So we were linked up with the Harare forward area.
That was your cell or your link, whatever it's called.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Prof, for sharing with us this information. Now, bring us into your NUSAS, UDF information, what was happening, formation of UDF.
Yeah, so the formation of UDF, as I was saying, in 1983, the apartheid government introduced these so-called reforms to the apartheid system. And their idea was to respond to a growing crisis of legitimacy by creating, firstly, a tricameral parliament, which would represent coloureds and Indians as minorities in proportion to their population in a racially defined tricameral parliament. And secondly, they created black local authorities, which were meant to represent the residents of urban townships. So black South Africans who did not have citizenship and who did not have the vote, but were given a vote for a local councillor, or you could say a local council, but which was confined to the townships as we know them. So they established here the Ibai Council, for example. So those two things, the tricameral parliament and the black local authorities, became the focus of a very, very important campaign, which was to expose the apartheid regime and to expose it as illegitimate and to demand a single, non-racial, inclusive, democratic South Africa in which everybody had a vote on equal terms.
And you were there and participated.
Yeah, and it wasn't that easy because there were a number of debates in Cape Town, where I was based, representing this national student movement, which had a largely white constituency, because it was based at the universities, which were defined as white universities under apartheid. And we worked together with COSAS and ASASO in that period before SASCO was formed.
Yes.
But there were some organizations who it was anticipated might join that broad front, who were opposed to the idea of NUSAS being represented there. They said we were the children of the bourgeoisie.
Yes, yes.
And they were not prepared to include us. So we had many fierce debates in that context. And eventually it was resolved that it was important principle that the UDF should be non-racial, that it should be inclusive, that it should be as broad as possible in terms of bringing in allies in order to prosecute the struggle and to broaden the mass mobilization. So, I mean, the UDF then brought in literally hundreds of small organizations. Some of them were already in umbrella organizations. And I'll give you one example, was a thing called the Interchurch Youth. And Interchurch Youth had hundreds of affiliates, which were local church youth organizations.
Prof, we spoke about earlier the formation of UDF. We spoke about your involvement in the struggle. And, you know, when people talk about the Rockland, we always read it in the papers and in the pamphlets distributed then. You will see all this, lots of people, the commotion and everything. But it's rare to find people that were there. Or it's my first time having someone that was there to talk about it to share with the public. What was actually happening there? Was it another 1955 Freedom Charter gathering?
Yeah. Well, it was really exciting. And I was traveling a lot around the country for the New South leadership. And so I went to Cape Town for the Rocklands launch of the UDF on the 20th of August, not having been directly involved in the management of it, but having been involved in a pre-attempt to organize a broad meeting in Cape Town, where we, with Cape Town activists, we organized lots of food and so on, but then we had quite a dramatic moment when some of the comrades from other organizations said no, they weren't going to participate, and we didn't know what to do with all the food we'd prepared. So that was a moment I remember more than in the preparation for the actual August launch. But the launch on the 20th of August, the atmosphere was absolutely electric. I mean, the significance of it was that it was held in Mitchell's Plain. Rocklands is in Mitchell's Plain, one of the biggest coloured townships in the Western Cape. And the significance of it was that mobilization of those residents against apartheid, which hadn't happened before at all. And I remember the song Buffalo Soldier, if you remember. These cars used to go around the townships, including the coloured townships, playing out of loudspeakers, the Buffalo Soldier, which became the theme song of the UDF launch. So it really mobilized the youth, you know, hundreds of thousands of young people. But the launch itself represented people from all over the country, from all different parts of the population of South Africa. It represented the old leadership who had been involved in the liberation struggle in the 1950s and who were present there. It involved church leaders. It involved people like Helen Joseph, one of the old Congress of Democrats leaders, and of course Alan Busak, who made his famous speech there, which really mobilized everybody. But I think the importance of it was it put forward a clear agenda, which was the agenda of a unitary, democratic, non-racial society in South Africa. And it put that clearly on the agenda, in the same way that the Freedom Charter in 1955 had put a clear program on the agenda of the country. And following that, the mobilization of the UDF nationally created what I call a counter-hegemony, i.e. it delegitimized the apartheid project, even the reform project of apartheid, and it put an alternative in its place, an alternative that everybody could relate to, that was inclusive, that was positive. So it wasn't just a destructive force, you know, it wasn't just saying we don't like apartheid, we're going to destroy apartheid. It was saying the alternative is here, it's within our grasp, and we know what we need, we know what we want, it's clear.
Well, yeah, what a description. And so UDF launch, everything came up, and then the launch is behind, the work had to be done.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, so what happened was that I moved to Port Elizabeth at that point. So beginning of 1984, I finished my student work and moved to Port Elizabeth. And here, as part of the UDF program, we set up area committees in different parts of the city. And I remember very clearly the first campaign we were involved in was the 1 million signature campaign. And we worked together with people from other parts, from the townships, from the Indian areas, from Malabar. Neela Hussain was on the coordinating committee.
Yes.
And we had these joint programs of going into the streets. I remember going into Causton and standing in the middle of Kempston Road, Harrower Road, with comrades from all over the city together with our UDF T-shirts, with these petitions which were setting out clearly what the UDF demands were and getting public support for them. So it was a way of explaining to people what UDF was, but at the same time getting their signature on the rejection of the tricameral parliament. We had another campaign, of course, around the election to the tricameral parliament, and we had big rallies in the northern areas, in Gelvendale. I think it was in the stadium in Gelvendale. Despite the great support for that, we had security police coming and slashing people's tires and creating havoc outside the stadium. It was interesting because, you don't reflect much now on what happened in the northern areas in the city like Gqeberha. But in fact, there was a very significant mobilization at that time.
Yes, and the UDF, if I may, it was not only about whites or blacks or coloreds. It was inclusive. If the rally in Galvandale, the issue of the northern areas massacre, those things are never spoken about or shared. It's only reflective of one side of the equation. Do you want to share about that?
I think, and I've written a paper about this, which I presented at the university some years ago, that non-racialism was actually a strategy. So I don't see non-racialism just as something which was a principle of our struggle, but it was a strategy. So we needed to build those organizations. Apartheid, what was the slogan? UDF unites, apartheid divides.
Yes.
So apartheid was premised on separating people according to their own defined racial groups, population groups, and physically, geographically separating people according to where you were allowed to live. So part of the program was to actually defy that in the way in which we organized. And I think that was very important, because building those non-racial relationships in our practice was a strategy of building what I call this counter-hegemony, of building this vision of what a future South Africa could be like.
As well with the Freedom Charter, a preamble saying
South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white.
Yes.
And no government can claim authority unless it is based on the will of the people.
Yes.
And I mean, it was a really important thing to do that. So, I mean, not only to organize the oppressed, but significantly to create dissent among the white ruling class, which was really important, So one had the assumption that the majority of whites voted for apartheid, and they did. They voted for the National Party for 40 years. 40 years. So it was clear that democracy wasn't going to come through that electoral system with its racially exclusive voting. And it wasn't going to come through a tricameral system either, which was weighted in favor of the white vote.
Yes.
So, we had to prove otherwise, that there was an alternative to that.
Prof, you left us talking about what non-racialism about and the million signatures campaign. And then can you share more what happened thereafter?
Yeah. So let me go on with the story. And just to clarify, I felt, in Cape Town, there were particular organizations which were critical of NUSAS as an organization which represented a white constituency. And some members of NUSAS were, of course, were actually children of the bourgeoisie.
Yes.
But personally, I come from a very middle-class family, not a bourgeois family at all. But in fact, I must say that I did feel very welcomed by comrades here in Nelson Mandela Bay. And in fact, from when I arrived here in the beginning of 1984 and we started working on these UDF campaigns, I always felt very much welcomed by the residents of the broader Nelson Mandela Bay. In fact, it was quite remarkable to me, given how few whites in this city were actually involved. It was a very, very conservative city. And I think just go back to that time, if you remember, the University of Port Elizabeth was
wonderful.
very conservative, very, very conservative. There were hardly any white activists involved as there were in places like Cape Town or Johannesburg. Anyway, so just to say that by the end of 1984, things really began to heat up here, shall we say. And in January 1985, the ANC issued a statement which was, can I say, building on the spirit of the UDF. But what had happened was that there had actually been an uprising in the townships in the campaign against the black local authorities.
Yes.
And the ANC statement called on everybody in South Africa to make apartheid ungovernable, to make apartheid unworkable, to render the country ungovernable and make apartheid unworkable. Now, that very powerful call was actually being put into practice in certain areas. I won't say the whole country, but by the middle of 1985, the apartheid security forces actually acknowledged that they had lost control over some townships, including New Brighton, KwaZulu, Zwide, Soweto on Sea. So, in effect, what happened was that people started developing their own structures of popular power and participating in street committees, in setting up area committees, in finding ways to govern themselves. So I don't see this as a negative thing, although there was extensive violence involved.
Yes.
But without going into the question of violence at this point, there was a sense in which people were really empowered through that process. And we talk about, in the analysis afterwards with hindsight, we talk about, was there dual power or not? And I think there's an argument that there was a very sort of temporal and local level dual power in that only certain townships were able to achieve that level of mobilization. What should I could talk about the particular incidents in which people were killed. I mean, the Langa massacre in March 21st, 1985 for one. And maybe I can start with that by saying that this came after a 3-day Black Weekend, which was a very significant occasion on which the UDF and its allies, and it tried to bring in all the trade unions, not always successfully bringing all of them in, but called for a 3-day stay away from work, as well as a boycott of shops and so on. And this was a very powerful action. In the wake of that, I'll give you a little anecdote in that regard. We held a meeting to call that stay away at Krekre's garage in New Brighton, on the edge of Deal Party. And after that meeting, at which we were trying to get a consensus with the trade unions who was going to be part of this and who wasn't, I was there with Roland White, who was the treasurer of the UDF in the region. And Roland was a student at Rhodes University. He was a friend of mine. And we left that crouching in the bottom of a taxi.
Wow.
But the security police had seen that this meeting was going on, and they stopped the taxi and arrested me and Roland for being in a township without a permit.
Oh my goodness.
So it was the only charge they could find against us was that we were in a township without a permit, which at that time, I mean, it's hard for people to even remember now. I mean, the height of apartheid, white people were not even allowed to be in a township. Crazy. Yeah, so that was before then the 21st. What happened was that during that Black Weekend, there were some youth who were shot by the police, and a funeral was called for the following week. And that funeral was banned. This was in Kariga in Uitenhage. Yes. The funeral was banned, but the residents did not hear about the banning of the funeral until it was too late. So they were marching from Langa Township, Kwalanga, to Kwanabukle. And as they went past the bottom of the center of the old Uitenhage town, the police blocked the road and opened fire and killed more than 20 people in that incident. It was really disastrous, and it was disastrous not only in terms of the loss of life on that day, but because it then sparked a whole cycle of violence in KwaNobuhle, which was really horrific, including the killing of Kini Kini's family, Kini Kini was a councillor, and many other people lost their lives in the following weeks. So, I mean, we could talk a bit more about unpacking the violence and what happened, but I think it was just a sort of indication of how the struggle was escalating at that point.
And the loss of control from
from
the ruling.
So by the middle of that year, we know that the Minister of Defence, the Minister of Law and Order, who was Louis Lekranji, I think, came to Port Elizabeth, and they met together with the local security guys, and they said, "You've got to bring this under control." And they did a couple of things. They issued live ammunition for a start, which they used then in crowd control. And secondly, they ordered secret assassinations of the key leadership. So we know that the PEBCO 3 were abducted and killed in April 1985. And then in June 1985, the Cradock 4, who had been organizing in Cradock, in Lingelihle Township, were killed. And the T-shirt that I'm wearing, this is a T-shirt with an image of Fort Galata. Fort Galata was the leader of the Cradock Youth Congress and worked very closely with Matthew Goniwe, who was the leader of the Cradock Civic what was it? Cradock Residents Association. Cradock Residents Association.
Wow.
Yeah.
Prof, yes, you spoke about everything and how the role of UDF was, and I think it delivered in my own view, because it has made apartheid unworkable, insignificant, and it was taking all the international, it brought all the international media houses and all those kind of things to expose what was happening. Now, maybe someone who does not know this history will ask, what happened to UDF? Where is UDF in today's world? Do you want to share a bit?
Yeah, sure. So, look, this is my opinion, and the opinion is not shared by everybody.
Yes.
But the United Democratic Front was formed for a particular purpose, and it achieved its goal. So, by 1990, the ANC was unbanned. The prisoners were released from Robben Island. The exiles came home, and the negotiation process started. The negotiation process led to the formation of a constitution which was a single, unitary and democratic South Africa, which was what the UDF had campaigned for. So in my opinion, the UDF, once an organization achieves its goal, then it disbands. It's no longer required as a permanent thing. So just to be clear, what is happening now is not the reformation of the UDF as an organization or a broad front of organizations. What's happening is a commemoration of the 40th anniversary of the formation of the UDF.
Yes.
And the purpose of that is to try and learn some lessons from that for how we organize today, for what we do today, how we confront the problems that our society faces. Because everybody agrees, South Africa is facing really, really serious challenges. And I don't need to spell those out to you or to any of our listeners. So some people are saying, well, our leadership, the political parties have let us down. They're not able to find a solution. we need the UDF to come back. And what we are saying is, no, that is not the purpose of the UDF, to replace the current political leadership. But what we can do is to learn some lessons about empowerment of ordinary people. What is active citizenry?
Okay.
How can we take action to do two things? The one is to hold our leaders to account. So think of how the UDF campaigned against the black local authorities. So the objective there was to make those structures unworkable, okay? Effectively delegitimize, destroy those black local authorities. So our objective now is not to destroy the local authorities. It's to say, hold them to account. If our local councillor is not delivering services,
yes,
how do we hold that person to account? How do we assist them to realize their objective of delivering services? So accountability is one. The other is actual transformation of society and ways in which citizens can organize to actually find an alternative, to transform the society and to implement alternatives. So it's not just about waiting for government to do something. It's about taking action.
Yes, and this is in the form of commemoration, not necessarily forming another structure or political party or a opposition.
Yeah. So commemoration is to reflect back, basically,
Yes.
and it's to say this was an extraordinary initiative. It was really important historically. What can we learn from it? And it's not to set up any kind of permanent structure. But what we would hope is that residents, members of different organizations, different sectors, churches, trade unions, youth organizations, women's groups, etc., that they will take something from this in terms of how they can be empowered and how they can take action to try and achieve some objective.
Yes, and you for those that do not understand or maybe view active citizenry, can you expand on that just to give them what actually this entails, active citizenry?
Yeah. So we are all now citizens, equal citizens in South Africa. Obviously, the most obvious way in which people should participate as citizens is through voting. And that is one aspect of active citizenry. But I would argue that active citizenry goes way beyond voting. So it means participating in decision-making, participating in assisting in programs in your own community, even in your neighborhood, even in your street, taking action against crime, action against corruption. It means trying to create food sovereignty,
Yes.
building a vegetable garden, a
Yes.
community kitchen, being involved in those kinds of activities as well. Personally, I'm in favor of community ownership of renewable energy, solar energy,
Yes.
and implementing projects like that, which could see hundreds of thousands of township residents owning and
their
controlling renewable
power
energy
station.
production.
And if I may come in, lots of people woke up to Gqeberha and having Port Elizabeth being taken away, and they were saying, no, we were never consulted. But there are public participation forums which are brought to discuss these things. So it's time that people should go and participate in those things. That's active citizenry, because they are brought into their areas. There is your plans, developmental plans
Yeah.
that are there with the councillors in order to make our communities livable and clean society, if I may put it that way. But people are not participating.
Sure.
That's active citizenry, because those are the things that are affecting them on daily basis, but they are not being taken advantage of.
Well, our laws and our constitution actually promotes participatory democracy. And we have structures like, as you say, integrated development planning,
Yes,
ward committees.
yes,
Those structures are in the law, and yet very few people participate in those processes of development planning, of ward committee structures, etc. So, what we used to say in the apartheid era was we have to create the space to organize. You have to create something at local level, find a little local issue you can organize around. But in this democracy, we have all the space we need, but people don't use that space effectively. So that is how I understand active citizenry, is where people participate in existing structures and use the space that exists to get the result that they want.
Yes, it's like the slogan that every member an organizer. Thanks, Prof.
Sure.
And what other aspects that you can say when and where is this commemoration, how is it done, and if people want to participate, how do they get involved?
Yeah. So
is it for everybody, or is it for former UDF activists?
No, it's not only for former UDF activists. I think former UDF activists will drive it because we feel passionate about it. But the idea is that everybody is included in this. We've got, I think, a steering committee in every province now. And there will be two national events, the one on the 20th of August, one in Johannesburg and one in Cape Town. But in each province, and in this province, there'll be a number of different events, both commemorative events and educational events.
Prof, we left each other talking about what is going to be happening, the commemorative, Cape Town and Joburg, provincial ones or regional ones, as well as educational programs. Can you share with the viewers what's going to be happening in those educational programs so that they can come and participate? How are they going to be done, where, and
yes,
etc.?
Thanks. So, the theme of this UDF 40th anniversary is active citizenry for accountability and transformation. And I think what that means is that there's going to be a whole number of different programs that people can get involved in. The details aren't worked out yet for every one of them, but for example, we will have seminars at Nelson Mandela University, at the Missionville campus, and we'll have meetings in different parts of the Eastern Cape as well, which people can participate in. And then what we're hoping is that different sectors and different organizations will take the initiative and in a creative way respond to this call. So to come up with programs which are relevant to your sector or your organization. We also really want this to be an intergenerational effort. So we really want youth to organize and to participate in this as well, that it's not confined to the older generation like me who were here 40 years ago as youth. We were young 40 years ago.
Yes. And in terms of political parties' participation, what's the scope? Is there a certain type of political parties or
so
UDF-aligned political parties? Or everyone is welcome?
Look, the thing is UDF is not a political party and it's not going to become a political party. But I think its alignment is clear from what I've outlined in terms of its agenda.
Yes.
The commemoration will be broad and inclusive. It's not going to be confined to particular parties.
It's free for everyone to participate in this.
Yeah.
Like Amaqhawe, Ethu.
Amaqhawe Ethu is a part of it already because Amaqhawe Ethu is involved with commemorating and understanding the role played by different people in the struggle against apartheid. And
all political parties.
One of the agendas of this UDF commemoration is to do precisely that.
Yes.
So we're hoping that we will partner with Amaqhawe in some of the local events here.
We have you here already.
Absolutely.
That's it for the commemoration, and make sure that there's education and make sure that there's mobilization for the theme. Exactly. Can you repeat the theme again, please?
Active citizenry
Yes.
for accountability and transformation.
Do you hear it yourself? It's too much English from my tongue. And she's just sharing. Prof, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for coming and giving us this information about yourself and information about the struggle and everything else. What can you share with the current youth? 40 years ago, we were youth. You did not have WhatsApp, you did not have internet, you did not have everything, but you went and stood in Kempston Road with pamphlets. What can you share with these youth of today?
Well, I want to share, what I learned from Matthew Goniwe, who was my hero at that time, and who said, really, the way to organize, it's to just go and listen to people, to understand what their problems are, and to work together to find a way forward.
You don't describe to people, you will listen to them, and you come back with feedback. I think I've come across that one before, and I think it's what is needed in today's, because leaders and their constituency, they are rift apart. Political parties are only seen during election times to come and campaign for votes. Other than that, there's nothing that happens. And if there is nothing else, Prof, that you want to share, I want to thank you and say thank you very much for coming to us and sharing your information. And it's not the first time we're hosting you. You had a lecture earlier on when we were still starting on Zoom and we only see the face. Now we see a bit of you. And thanks very much, and keep up supporting Amaqhawe to keep on being this activist for democracy. You are a lover of freedom. And horses. Which one is first? Is it horses or?
Freedom.
Freedom, thank you. You heard for yourself, we hosted Prophet Janet Cherry from NMU, an activist, an academic, as well as an author. She shared everything, but today it was about UDF commemoration, active citizenry, to hold leaders accountable. Am I right? So there's going to be education programs in place. There's going to be everything just to commemorate this giant organization that has changed the landscape of South African politics. My name is Yongamela Manene. On behalf of Amaqhawe Ethu, we also want to thank you, the viewers and supporters of this initiative, and keep on those stories coming and keep on supporting Amaqhawe Ethu. Thank you very much.